hearing all about yours. Pay Forward Coaching is the brainchild of Mike Connolly, who's on the call. He put together this fabulous team. We're now at over 70 volunteers. We've held over 2,000 one-on-one sessions. Of course, everything I'm mentioning is 100% free, 100% of the time. So that's the amazing part about what we do. So I can go on about what we do, but I'll save that for later. But I want to go ahead and introduce our fabulous panelists, starting with Deborah. Deborah, and I'm going to allow everyone to speak as well, please. It won't just be me, but she is the vice president. If you guys see me looking elsewhere as I'm looking at my notes, I can't memorize everything, but she is the vice president of Higher Minds with over 11 years of recruiting. And prior to that, she had experience in account executive in media. And all of our panelists that I'm introducing, by the way, they also do a lot of hiring. So hence the hiring managers. So they definitely are experts in their fields. We have Victoria Nichols. She is the Chief Customer Officer at Kid Care by Minute Menu. She has extensive experience in customer success management and client management. And she's one of our original founding members and current board member of Pay Forward Coaching. So she's amazing. Not that I'm, partial or anything, but that's my girl. Then we have Krishna, and I hope I don't butcher this. I practice a lot. Ramaswamy. Yeah, okay. He is a partner at Stage 2 Capital Catalyst with over 19 years of experience ranging in data science, building platforms, and numerous hiring panels for product management roles. And also a current Pay Forward Coaching advisor. So also partial there. Last but not least, we have Diego Sanson, a director of Sudovo, with over 20 years of experience in business development and sales. And it was really cool looking at Diego's LinkedIn because he's like all over the world. He has lots of international experience. So I'm going to allow a couple of minutes for each of our panelists to say their hellos, and then we're going to get started with our questions that we've generated. So kicking it off with Deborah first.
Hi, thank you guys all so much for joining and for having me today. I will just introduce myself by saying I spent the first half of my career in advertising and spent a lot of time working with consumer brands and consumer behaviors. And I liked my career, but I didn't love my career. So I spent a lot of time interviewing because I was always looking for the next thing, better management. And by nature of that, spent a huge amount of time on job boards, on interviews. And I got really curious as to how the heck people get hired and how decisions are made. And I wanted to see what was behind the curtain, no pun intended to the title of this talk. I moved into recruiting, and I've been recruiting for about 12 years now, and I recruit for the kind of positions that I came out of. So I do sales, I do marketing, I do product, I do customer success. The kind of companies that I work with are B2B SaaS. I do some consumer brands, DTC, e-com, some healthcare tech. And I work usually at the director through SVP level. But I'm excited to share some insights with you today. I've loved being on the other side and seeing how these decisions are made and why. And excited to bring anything that might be able to help you all in your job search.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Handing it over to Victoria.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for attending. I feel very privileged to be here today and share my experience. I have been in customer success, sales, and marketing roles throughout my career, and I've worked in all sorts of industries across companies, anywhere from 30 people to 2,000 plus people, pre-IPO, post-IPO, pre and post-acquisition, you name it, I've been there. I think one thing that might differentiate me is I absolutely love interviewing, and I don't just mean interviewing other people, interviewing at companies. I don't know that many people that like that, but I also really like interviewing as well. I think it can be a really positive experience. I think it can be something you can get an edge on, and it is something that the more you do it, the better you get at it. I'm also a person that was impacted by layoffs and had a very grueling 6-month job search. So I've been on all sides of it, and hopefully today I can share some things that have helped me and others in my community to climb out of wherever they were and run towards their dreams. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you. Krishna, handing it to you.
Thanks, Pardise. Hi, everyone. I'm Krishna. Currently, I'm focused more on the data analytics, data science, product side of things, but I've had a little bit of a winding journey to get there. I started in finance and then was working more in traditional marketing and then digital marketing, then kind of went into e-commerce, and that's when I kind of started going down the big data analytics side of things, and had the opportunity to grow a team at TripAdvisor from scratch, basically going from 0 to, I think, at one point we were at over 30 in a 1.5-year window. So you can imagine how many interviews I went on, had to conduct over that period. You know, it was a big learning experience for me. I think to what Victoria said, it used to be daunting, definitely on both sides of the table, right? And I think, like, I'm an extrovert, so I have the benefit of, I get a lot of energy from engaging conversations with people. And I think that's kind of the way that I always try to approach my interviews on either side of the table is, you know, try to connect with someone and really trying to figure out, like, how can we bring energy into the conversation and drive value out of that. Also similar to Victoria, I've worked in companies from the seed all the way through, you know, Fortune 100. So I had a bunch of varied experience along my journey. Excited to be here.
Thank you. Last but not least, Diego.
Pleasure to be here, and thank you for the opportunity. And I'm happy to share a little bit about my experience as well too. If you go onto my LinkedIn and you'll see there's nothing linear about my life or my career. I haven't stayed in one industry or so forth. I worked in financial services. I worked human capital. I worked in consumer internet. I started my own company, and now I am starting something new in e-clinical and life sciences side, right? But there's certainly tangents across the board. If you look at my experience, you know, international business development, sales, on the commercial end of things. So from having to scale my own company and my own people to hiring and building teams, you know, certainly have had a breadth of experience, not only here in the US, but globally, living in Latin America and working across Europe, Asia as well too. So definitely understand, you know, kind of the challenges, but I think if anything you'll see from my experiences, it's never too late to try something new or do something different. And sometimes, you know, I guess my biggest thing is I always try to work with people is your experience is much more transferable than sometimes you think it is, right? And then having to sort of have this 100,000 view of yourself and what you've done, and especially if you've had a longer career, right? You take your own experience for granted, you know? You know, I think for me, I found that having those transferable skills are really sort of the key to sometimes go outside of your comfort zone, and you'd be surprised, you know, the things that you find that might be right under your nose, but you never thought of.
Very true. Very true. So now we're going to get into our list of questions. Although our wonderful panelists have all, you know, different various backgrounds, our questions are going to be a lot more generic, or generalized, so that it could benefit anyone listening on these calls. So as you're listening to our speakers go over their answers, I do encourage you to kind of associate that with your industry and see those, you know, things like transferable skills and you know, notes like that in their answers. So I'm going to kick it off with Deborah, and we're just going to kind of ping pong around a little bit. All right. So Deborah, what's one advice you would give to candidates looking to stand out in the application and interview process?
hot topic, big topic, so much we can do with that we don't have the time to, so I'll keep it succinct. The first thing I would say is that the application process is different than the interview process. So when we're talking about applications, there's a lot of noise about bots and keywords. The first myth that I'll debunk is that the ATSs, the applicant tracking systems, are not as smart or as AI focused as we think they are. Every single ATS still requires a human to be involved. However, so people are very concerned about having buzzwords, keywords. They're writing over with white to get their keywords in to get the ATS to pick it up. My advice on that note would be, do not worry about any of that. A human will look at your resume. The challenge is that, especially in a market like the one we're in today, is that hiring managers, recruiters, HR, whoever it may be, are looking for the resumes that match the job that they need to hire for, which means that fundamentally, depending on where you are at what level in your career, if you're senior, it means that they want you to be able to do the job and hit the ground running on day one. You've done it before and you can do it again for them. If you're more junior in your career, it means that you can already do 50 to 75% of the job. Now, that's a little bit different if we're talking pure entry level straight out of school. But if we're even talking 2 to 3 years out of school, that's what humans are looking for. So for example, if you are, let's say, a few years out of school and you're currently an account executive at a PR agency, the jobs that you are going to be your resume will be picked up for is exactly that. An AE or a similar type role at a similar type PR agency. I know that sounds really deflating. Like, great, I can only do what I'm already doing, which is the exact opposite of what Diego just said. No, that's not the messaging. But if you're asking the question as to how do I get through the clutter of applicants, the shortest answer is apply for the jobs that you align for. Now, let's say you're an account executive at a PR agency and you want to go brand side. Great, you can do that, but you need to find the common thread. So you need to be applying to similar AE roles, brand side within PR. You want to look for the bridge. You want to look for the reason why you can do that job on day one of being hired. It might be a switch in industries. I've done PR in healthcare and now I'd like to do PR in fashion. Okay, well, your bridge is PR. Or it might be, I've worked in PR in healthcare and I want to go into PR. I want to go into marketing in healthcare. Okay, well, your bridge is then healthcare. So in this kind of market, to get your resume picked up, you need to have something relevant close to the top of your resume, meaning not a long time ago, not a job you had a long time ago, something that you've actively been doing that speaks the language of the job that you're looking for or applying for. That's how to break out of the clutter of like the applicant pool. In terms of interviewing, that's a bit of a different story. Your resume should be your best marketing tool that you've ever written. I know that sounds like a lot of pressure, but it should be a marketing tool that gets you the interview. After the resume is picked up, you don't need to worry about it. The interview, how to stand out in the interview, few recommendations: samples, data, fact, success stories. What did you do? Why was it relevant? Why did you drive impact? And what were the results? So when you are preparing for an interview, you want to spend some time to think about the accomplishments that are banners to your career. We are not looking for people to say, well, I was responsible for managing A, B, and C. Words like managing, words like responsible for, they don't help us. And I say us, it doesn't help us as candidates. It doesn't help us as hiring managers. We are looking for what impact did you have in your role? And it doesn't need to be that you discovered the cure for cancer or a new element on the periodic table, but it should be something such as, our client started with this challenge. When I started on the project, the challenge was X. Our plan was Y. My POV on it was this. Here's the approach I took. Here were the results, and this was the long tail impact. Some of you may have heard of the STAR methodology. I don't subscribe to a specific methodology of interviewing. Depending on the company and who you're talking to, you could be walking into very formulaic interviews. You could be walking into very casual conversational interviews, and you sort of have to be prepared for both and either. And the best way to be prepared and to stand out is bring the data, bring the facts. I asked somebody a question in an interview the other day. I said, how can you quantify that for me? Which basically meant, give me some numbers to prove, or give me some data to prove you're telling me I did this really well. Can you prove that? How do you know you did that really well? Do you think you did that really well? Because if so, that's not a great answer. What is a great answer is, we succeeded tremendously, and here's how I know. Here's the data, and it may have resulted in a promotion, or it may have resulted in something even minor, like a bump in web traffic. So it doesn't need to be something. These accomplishments don't need to be monumental. They do need to be tangible, and you need to be comfortable talking about them with data and fact to back them up. And that, in my opinion, is the strongest way to differentiate yourself in an interview setting.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Great. Now I'm going to switch to Victoria. Again, these might be targeted, but look for those key answers. So Victoria, what are the key qualities or attributes you seek in a candidate when hiring, for example, client success roles?
Yeah, and I love that I'm going in the back of what Deborah said, because I'll talk about some key attributes, and again, I'll talk about customer success, client success, but really what I'm talking about are these customer facing roles, or roles where you're really interacting with customers. But the one theme I do want to emphasize is, whatever the characteristic is, there really needs to be a story behind it and some data. So for example, just saying, oh, I'm really confident is not enough, but showing in the interview, showing that you're confident, as well as giving an example of how confidence has helped you to achieve your goals, overcome hardships or challenges, be able to deal with challenging customer situations or complex problems that needed resolution. That's really something that would catch my eye. So I sort of gave away my first one, and I'll narrow it down to maybe about 5 key attributes that I look for specifically in either customer success or even sales type of person, but someone that's really out there trying to move the needle for a company. I mentioned the first one is confidence. Part of the reason I look for that is communication is a massive objective of these customer-facing roles. Communication with the client, communication internally with your team, if it's a software company, with your technology partners, if it's a services company, with your services partners, even with your marketing team, depending on what it is. But communication is key. And having the confidence when you're telling your customer story and you're sharing the voice of the customer is key in order to win the hearts and minds of both your internal teams and your external teams. I'm not saying that every single day needs to be one where you show up and you're a lion. I get that. But I do think innately, if you're going to be heading into a customer success role, confidence either has to be something you practice every day or something that comes natural to you. Obviously, someone that's more extroverted, that gets fueled by customer interactions, will experience that joy and that energy that comes with it. But even if you're more introverted, but you're confident, that shows. And especially in some of the companies I worked for more enterprise customer type of roles, you don't need to be a big extrovert to be a very successful CSM. Actually, if you're more analytical, more data-driven, maybe have less context to work with, but a lot of really high stakes context, that could really work in your favor. So please don't get discouraged if right away you're saying, oh, well, I'm a little bit more introverted, or I don't really have that innate confidence. Confidence comes from experience. Confidence is something that you can work on yourself and work on every day. Becoming confident in an interview, I do believe is a must. The second thing I'll say, if you're going to be customer facing in any way, is empathy. empathy is an essential skill. You truly need to understand what your customer is going through, and you need to feel it. That's what empathy is. Empathy is what drives patience, and patience is what's going to allow you to have those active listening skills where you are really understanding what it is that your customer wants, and you are able to use your communication skills and your patience to relay that and advocate for them internally, and be able to come back to the customer and even be able to deliver information in a way that's true to them and true to the story that they're telling you and the pain that they're sharing. Another characteristic that I look for, and I would say this is true across any employee and any role, you really cannot go wrong with this, but I really feel like you need this in a lot of doses if you're going to be customer facing, is tenacity. You get knocked down, but you get yourself back up again. Having that type of grit, having that type of can-do attitude is everything. Everything we do, especially when we're starting new, I mean, we're all experiencing that imposter syndrome. I've had it. Anyone I've ever talked to that has it. CEOs have it. Whenever we're trying to do something new, you're not supposed to be good at it. You're supposed to not know what you're doing, but you must have some of that tenacity, some of that grit that helps to get you through some of the darker times. What I mean by darker times is you made a mistake. You feel terrible about it. Maybe your peers feel terrible about it. Maybe even your boss speaks to you. You're at your lowest of lows. What do? You could sulk for the rest of the week, and maybe sometimes you have to. But at some point, you get right back up again, and you learn from the experience. And if you have the capacity to learn from the experience and push through it, you will start eliminating all of that self-doubt, all of that imposter syndrome, because you will get better. So you just have to stick with it. The next one I'll say, and this one's really a big differentiator for me, is curiosity. You have to be interested in what you're doing. Curiosity to me is something I feel like I can explain very simply, right? Someone says something, and instead of you being like, oh, that's cool, maybe I'll ask someone about it, you're like, let me Google this thing. Let me chat GPT it. Let me do a deep dive. And it doesn't even have to be deep, but just wanting to understand the core root challenge is something that can really help you with your problem solving skills. I also attribute curiosity to a lot of proactiveness. And I can see when I'm interviewing folks, ones that have truly done their due diligence and ones that just spend 5 minutes on the website and they've just done some surface level research. So being proactive is massive in any customer success roles, especially CSM roles, and any roles that have any sort of upsell, cross-sell type of experience. And last but not least, I really look for someone I actually want to work with. And for me, work is not boring. I love coming to work. I wake up very excited to come to work. That doesn't mean every day is easy, but I do look for someone that knows how to have fun. What I mean by that is I like very serious people, but that doesn't mean they can't have fun and that can't be funny. And that to me means bring your true self to the interview. Please don't show all of yourself on day one, like in the interview, use your best judgment on that. But a smile goes a long way. A joke, a proper, appropriate joke goes a long way, but be who you are and that will shine through.
Thank you very much. All right, Krishna. So can you discuss the importance of leadership skills in project or product management roles and how you evaluate these skills in a candidate?
Thanks, Pardise. I think this is going to be probably a little bit more product management focused, though I think we generalize most of this into project. I just want to piggyback off of what Victoria just said. From a leadership perspective, very much depends on what level we're talking about here, but from like a people leadership perspective, kind of what I said earlier in my introduction is I almost think I can distill this down to one thing. If somebody walks into the room and I'm more energized after having a conversation with them, generally that means they're going to probably be the right cultural add, the right person to come in to lead this team, lead it in a way, that. And I really thought a long time about this over the course of my career because, there's tons of really smart, talented people that I've worked with, but you walk out of the room after having a 30-minute meeting with them and you're like, that just sapped all my energy for the day. I need to go take like a 20-minute break, hang out, come back. if that's the way that you feel coming out of an interview, then I think that's a pretty huge red flag in general. So that's kind of my number one on the people side is usually if you're bringing the energy and you're carrying the interviewer with you on that, like that's a really positive sign. I actually want to take this question a little bit in a different direction. Since I think the people leadership piece, generally when you're evaluating that across a group of the panel that's going to be interviewing you, a lot of that has to do with the actual composition of the people and what's complementary to that team and everything else that exists. So I'm actually going to leave that one out a little bit out. So I think from a product perspective, the things that I've really found useful to probe more into kind of break down into 3 other areas, which is thought leadership, organizational leadership, and then kind of negotiation and prioritization on one thing as a 3rd category. So starting on the thought leadership side, the first and biggest thing for me, if you're a rock star product person, is that you can demonstrate you are an SME, you understand your customer, and you understand your product. I have unfortunately been on numerous interviews where I've asked a product person, like, what is it that your company does? And they don't have a great answer to me. And that right there is pretty much the end of the interview, because, ultimately at the end of the day, especially when we're on the tech side of things, right? Product is really hard because generally you're trying to make something net new that does not exist before. Yes, you don't always have to reinvent the wheel everywhere you go if you're moving to a new place. To Diego's point, there's plenty of transformational skills that you can take from one place to the next. But in general, the reason that we need product is we want to build something new, right? So that all starts with you have a really strong understanding of what is the pain points that exist and how does our product stack up to addressing those pain points that exist. So if you can demonstrate that, that's generally a very strong demonstration of being a subject matter expert and thought leadership. And that's true for any level. Then I think as you start to get a little bit more senior, what I really want to see is that you can take something that's a little bit more ephemeral, strategy up to vision or mission, and you can convert that into an actual technology ask, or if you're not in technology, an actual product ask. How do we convert this idea of this is the main theme the company's trying to solve for into something that's actually tangible? And a lot of times that's easier said than done, and there's a lot of hand waving that I think goes on between that, hey, I'm on the senior leadership team view, to I'm actually somebody that's on the ground implementing. There's usually a pretty large gap there, and I think that's where product can be a really, really great resource, and this is an opportunity for you to demonstrate how you can bridge those 2 things. So moving more on to the organizational side of leadership, that kind of transitions into, okay, now that you've identified this is the core area that you want to tackle, how do you create an actual roadmap that delivers us value along the way? So one, being able to demonstrate that you can understand, hey, this is what an MVP product looks like. We actually just got off of a PFC call where we kind of explored what we want that product to evolve to, and that was kind of an open conversation. So, really understanding how do you trim down all of the different competing factors that could exist into something that will deliver value, and then make a roadmap that delivers iteratively against that. That's a huge skill set that I think is in high demand. So the one key here is you need to be specific, and that's a theme that I think I'm going to have with all the answers that I'm going to give in this panel. Is specificity is really important. I think when I've read a lot of resumes, people say that they did something in a very vague sense, and you want to really get into, no, what did you actually specifically do, and how did that drive the value that you were trying to create? And it's usually very obvious once you get to kind of the 2nd or 3rd level, how involved you were with a specific project. If you can't get down to that 3rd level, okay, maybe you were peripherally involved. Maybe it was your team, and if it was your team, that's fine, but you should also demonstrate that, like, okay, I was actively managing them in the correct way to get the outcomes that we needed. But I think that organizational piece of, how do you structure the work and then get it done is really important. And then the last piece of leadership that I want to talk through here was negotiation and prioritization. This one, I think, is probably the trickiest and most relevant as you start to get to more senior levels organizationally. I think this is true from the get-go. This is important for an entry-level person, but I would say less so, because usually you are given things to do and then you try to execute. Whereas, you're like GPM level or something like that higher. It is really important that you can demonstrate and quantify with data why it is valuable that you did the work that you did. And that goes back to, being able to communicate that both up to your leadership audience, depending on what the interview panel looks like, but also to your peers and to the team in terms of being able to set the context appropriately, especially when you're, dealing with engineering teams and things like that. It's really important that they know why you are asking them to do the set of things that you're doing, and if you need to pivot, why you are pivoting. So that ability to clearly demonstrate the value of what you're driving and how do you negotiate both up and down is one of the really key pieces of leadership that I like to probe into when I'm talking with product. And the last piece there is also just demonstrating that you're not going to do work that is of low value, even if it's low lift. Like there's definitely been times where I've had conversations where somebody demonstrates a lot of body of work that they've done, and then you really probe into like, why did you do that? There didn't seem to be a really great outcome associated with that. That to me is a little bit of a red flag.
So thank you so much. All right, Diego. So how important is prior industry experience when you're hiring for AE or sales leadership position?
Yeah, so this is interesting because, going back to what Deborah said, I think it depends a lot on the positions that you're talking about, right? Even before we just got on talking to this, I was talking with Victoria, and she was actually asking me about if I had anybody or any contacts or people that were looking for a SLED sales position selling into government, and so forth. And that's one where, for example, you need experience. You need to understand how that works. That's not one you fake it till you make it. You either know how it works or it doesn't, In other industries, you may require also some sort of certification, right? You need to be able to have certain, licensure, things like that, where you sort of need to understand that if it's technical, selling SaaS and selling specific software may be similar, but you can't fake one, and you might be able to do the other. So I think it really depends on the job. And also, to Deborah's point too, like reading the job description, I think is very important, right? Because I've interviewed so many people that have come and sort of like had no clue about what we did or about the job or why they wanted to do it. And again, you would say, well, how did that person get through the process, and so forth. But I think, again, to me, it's a very important aspect for you to have an understanding of why would you be a fit for that job, right? And I think that, at least in sales, I think that is one where objectively you do have transferable skills that can go across industries. And for me, what I look for in people there is, not just the result, right? Because I could look at that. It's what's between the bookend, right? Between, why are you good at what you do? We were with Mike earlier this week, and one of the things, we were with a group of alumni from Car Gurus where we used to work. And one of the things we said is sometimes the grass isn't greener somewhere else. So top salespeople leave, they go somewhere else. And then all of a sudden they realize it was a time and place. It was the company. There were more order takers than professional salespeople, right? So I think what I look for is important is when people are able to provide, a full story of what's your framework of thinking. It's a lot of what Victoria talked about, right? What's your approach to doing your work? Are you a professional, right? And to me, a professional is someone who practices every day what they do. They get better, they learn, they're trained, right? What is it that you in sales? Have you been trained classically? Have you, whether it's Sandler or, spin selling, what is it that makes you? Because to me now I'm like, oh, okay, this person has a framework. They have an understanding. Now you can apply that across industries. You can apply it, but at the end of the day, the function ends up being the same. And what you need to sort of say is, what's in your toolkit, right? What are those things? A lot of times we take that for granted, especially if you have a lot more experience, right? And, you know, I think to Deborah's point, if that doesn't come out, you know, in your resume, and it doesn't come out as like those things that pop up. So to me, it's not only do I want to know that you exceeded your quota, I'm interested on, well, how did you do that, right? You know, what is it that you bring to the table? So, you know, I think from that perspective, I see, you know, a lot of things that now become, you know, frameworks are repeatable, they're scalable, and you could do that horizontally, you could do that vertically. But again, that's part of the development, I think, in terms of yourself as a professional in whatever you do, right? It doesn't have to just be sales. You know, if you're a project manager, you know, what tools do you use? You know, like what is it that you know, right? And I think that the people that usually connect all those dots are the ones that, as a hiring manager, you're like, okay, wow, this person really, you know, doesn't matter. They'll sell, you know, ice Eskimos, you know, that sort of thing.
And Deborah, I see you had your hand up.
Yeah, Diego, you mentioned candidates showing up without an understanding of the job description. So I see all sides of this. Like, yes, the role says 3 days a week in Boston. You live in LA. Why should you even apply? So like, that's one side of it. But I also just want to say, job descriptions are often written really poorly. I actually kind of make the joke that part of the reason I'm in business is because job descriptions are written really poorly, and that they don't get the right applicants, and therefore they come to a recruiter like me to find the right people. And I just wanted to touch upon that, like, some of the ways that I've learned to read job descriptions. A lot of job descriptions are have a lot of generalizations, attention to detail, ability to roll up your sleeves, things that all of us could look at and say, like, yeah, I do that. And then they're not qualified, or they're like, I don't know, I was perfect for this and I didn't get it. I advise people look through the job description if there's any technology mentioned. So for example, I can read a marketing job description that reads very generic marketing, and then they say like must have Eloqua or HubSpot experience. And I'm like, okay, that's marketing automation. And that means we're looking for somebody who's done X and Y and Z. It doesn't mean you can't have a tech that's transferable, but like sometimes there are hints in the job descriptions, especially for they're written vaguely, marketing, sales. Like if a sales job description says must have, it's like the sled roll, Victoria, like must have experience selling into government, you will not, either your resume won't get picked up, or if it does, the interview will not go well if you get on and say, well, I haven't sold to government, but I'm really interested in it. And just want to share in the kind of hiring environment we're in right now, does that mean you can never get that job? No. Does it mean that if it's a mid-level to senior level job and it's a sled position, if you haven't done it, you're probably not going to be qualified for it. So I hope that helps in some regard. I know these job descriptions can be really confusing, and we see people say all the time, I was perfect for this and my resume didn't even get picked up. And I say to people a lot, like, you don't know what they were looking for. You probably weren't perfect, but it's not you. It's not because you're not great. It's just, you don't know what they were looking for. They may have been looking for X or Y and you had A or B. Like, a lot of it is a matching thing versus I don't think this candidate is very good.
And that's going to be a really good segue to my next question for you. But before we do that, I'm going to go to Krishna, and then we're going to do a quick little time check, and then we'll proceed with our questions. So Krishna, I know you had your hand up.
Thanks. I'll keep it brief. I think past resume screen, even once you're in the interview, one of my favorite questions to ask, and anytime I've been asked it, it generally is a good sign, is just starting the interview with, what does your ideal candidate look like when you're the interviewee? Because it helps you tailor everything that comes next to making sure that you are checking the right boxes. And to Deborah's point, like, you don't know who wrote the job description. So sometimes they're great, sometimes they're not. I would say, you know, one thing that I did really like that we did at EverQuote was we used to give out the scorecard prior to interviews to all of the candidates that came in, which that was the first time that had ever happened to me. And I was like, this made the interview process 100,000 times better, because it was just very clear, like, this is what we want you to do. This is what you're coming in to do. Make sure you present relevant experience. I'm going to assume that by and large, that's not going to be the case for most of the interviews you will go on for the rest of your life. But if you ever do see that, or if you're on the other side, you have the opportunity to present that to potential interviewees, it's such a big benefit to both parties.
Awesome. Thank you. So we have about 18 minutes-ish left for the remainder of the call. We have so much great content that we want to cover. So in an effort for time for the panelists, let's try to minimize our answers to about 1 minute so that we can get through one more round for everyone. And then I want to give everyone opportunity for their final thoughts, and then one last final plug for Pay Forward Coaching. So, Deborah, we were just talking about the making sure that you're, a good fit for these roles and really dissecting the job description. What advice would you give to candidates that they know that they don't want to pursue, let's say, sales anymore? They're over it. They're just, burnt out. What advice would you give to them that are looking to do those career transitions, but when they look at those, job descriptions for a complete opposite role, they're like, I know I don't match that. What kind of advice can they work with?
Yeah, I'm going to watch the time and try to be really succinct. The best answer I can give is write your resume and tell the story about what you want to be doing, not about what you did. So the sort of silly example I use is, if you want to be a head chef, and on your path to get there, talk about how you contributed to deciding, contributing to recipes and menus. You don't need to talk about the fact that you wash dishes. That's not going to help move you forward. So in terms of, I've been in sales, but I want to get into marketing, pull the shreds of the marketing experience you have and make your resume. You can't lie. You don't want to say you were a marketer when you really weren't, but you want both your resume and your interviewing to tell the story as to what you have done that is relevant to marketing, and therefore why you could, again, hit the ground running, do the job effectively with some ramp up time. Career changes are a little bit different, and it's true both for the roles as well as the industry. I, again, really recommend looking for a bridge. So if you're in sales, but you want to get into marketing and you've been in healthcare, stay in healthcare for your next move. Make one move at a time. So look for that bridge, because companies like to hire people who are coming from either competitors or similar companies or things that are like them. So sales to marketing, keep the industry the same. If you're dying to get out of the industry, maybe stay in sales, but you can go from healthcare to fashion.
That's a really good tip. I didn't even think about that, versus just starting net new. I don't know if you all wrote that down. That was a really good tip. Victoria, in your experience, what separates exceptional, and I'm just going to say candidates, from the rest?
I love that question. Always makes me think of good to great for businesses, but at an individual level. So I'll talk about a few things. First and foremost, I think it's how you show up to the interview. Bring your full self. Remember that even if you are feeling low and down and jaded about this interview process, you are still interviewing the business as well. And so hopefully that can help you claim a little bit more of a sense of ownership and of power over the process, and not make you feel helpless about it. But if I was to pinpoint a few different things, I think for customer-facing roles, the biggest thing I look for is someone that can anticipate the customer's needs. And the way that I think you do that can really differentiate someone is, it tells me how proactive they are versus reactive, but it also tells me how they're using data to help them make data-driven decisions. The more data you have, the smarter judgment calls that you can make. The other thing I really look for is, what are people doing to better themselves? Personally, yes, but I am talking more about professionally. And so I like to hear what kind of books are they reading or podcasts are they listening to? what's the level of research that someone's gone. I recently interviewed someone that said, oh, I went to your website, then I went to Capterra, then I went to Glassdoor, then I went, and they listed off 5-7 things I didn't even know we were on, reviews in our company. They did their due diligence because that mattered to them. So doing that level of depth, I think, matters, and it adds to your points with me when I think about business acumen.
Awesome. Thank you. So Krishna, keeping with the theme of, transitioning from maybe careers to roles, what advice would you give a candidate looking to perhaps transition completely brand new into a product role? What are some things that they can do in their current role to strengthen those skills?
So I think I'm going to borrow from Deborah here, because that's literally what I had written in my notes. I was like, figure out what area you excel in currently, and then understand how can you apply that to a more product-oriented role to start with. So I'm actually in the midst of a very similar transition. I would say the last couple of years, I've moved to almost more of a product role compared to where I was more pure analytics and kind of strategy before that. And the bridge there was pretty clean. It was, I was used to working in big data. I had a pretty technical background. And then that evolved into, wait, why don't I just help start building products that are based off of this deep technical expertise that use data and the math skills that I had already. So I think that's kind of the natural way I would approach it is, if you're a marketer, for instance, what the marketing products that are out there are, what the customer pain points are, and kind of going back to what I said originally, it's really about being an SME and understanding who is the consumer, who's the customer, what's the pain point, and then, how do we solve against that pain point? And then applying, the organizational skills that I described earlier. So you're not just solving a specific problem that, it's not the, hey, we see this thing over here is broken. It's really understanding the full system to understand, okay, that thing is a symptom of a much larger problem. Let's figure out what is the right system that we want to implement as opposed to just solving that one-off problem. And I think that generally opens the door to much more interesting and diverse conversations where you can show off your understanding of, the product space and the consumer base in a way where, okay, maybe you didn't have the specific product work done before, but it's not going to be a hard transition for you. It's just kind of like, all right, we have the frameworks already in place to what Diego said earlier. You can show a repeatable process that is going to lead to positive outcomes, even if you don't have the outcomes already in your bag.
Very nice. All right, Diego. So oftentimes as a hiring manager, we usually have maybe a good 60 minutes or so to, make a decision on whether or not we want to, move the candidate forward. How do you assess the candidate's potential for success in this 60 minutes during the interview process? We'll just say for a sales role, for example.
Sure. So, I think it sort of dovetails to my previous answer, a little bit, but, the first one, when it comes to sales, is pretty objective, right? So you're looking at it's performance-based. You can easily sort of show and say that I've met and exceeded expectations. It's a percentage of, and you really can sort of show the impact that you've had into the previous jobs that you had and so forth. But that only tells you so much. I'm interested then in trying to find out, are you toxic? Are you like a lone wolf, or are you a team player, right? Do you help people up, or do you bring other people down, right? So I think from my perspective, I try to sort of get a more general understanding of what makes you tick, right? What kind of person are you? And I think that's important, especially when it comes to sale, because yes, it's individual, but it has a huge impact on the rest of the team. Are you someone that's going to bring everybody up with you? And again, that goes back to understanding is, a day in the life of how do you start your day? How do you do your job? And to me, those are the key critical things to determine, will someone have repeatable, scalable success, over time? Are you consistent, right? Do you peak and valley, type of things? And why are you sometimes really good and not others, So from my perspective, what I try to sort of understand is, again, if it's a craft and it's sales or whatever you do, is how do you do that job? Because to me, that's going to be the biggest predictor of, all right, that fits into the culture that I have or what I'm looking for. And then also now I understand, oh, wow, now I know why this person has been successful throughout their career, right? Because they practice their sport, they get better at it, they get coached on it, right? They take feedback, and I think regardless of where you are, if you're beginning or you're well into your career, having that growth mindset, I think, is very important, because that's the only way that you're going to continue getting better at what you do.
Awesome. Love that. And that can easily apply to any role. So we have about 8 minutes left, and I like to spend this last couple of minutes doing one final thought from each of you, and just any general advice to a job seeker, how to maybe best ace an interview, or any words of wisdom you want to leave us with. But if we can keep that to about maybe a minute or so each, and I'm going to rotate backwards this time. Diego, starting with you.
Sure. So I'm going to leave you with just a couple of things, and these are personal to me, so take it or leave it at that fact. But these are the things that for me, especially in an environment where it might be tough to find a job and so forth. One is think and be like a shark, right? Motion, constant motion, do something, because I think what happens with people is they stagnate, and you sort of start thinking of like, okay, everything is like on top of me. And there's a lot of reasons why you want to do that, but that's not going to really help change your position, right? So doesn't mean that you can't feel bad or you can have those thoughts and everything else. But I think that constant motion, thinking, what's your next move? What's in your control? What can you do is key, right? Because I think that will give you momentum. And momentum builds on itself, right? Because now all of a sudden you did something good and then something else happens. And that's not coincidence. That's just something that I think happens. And then the second thing is, go analog, right? And what I mean by that is people connections, talk to people. I found and done things across industries and things like that, because I got introduced to people, or I talked to people, and I think it goes hand in hand with being a shark, right? So, being that needle in a haystack of 10,000 applications in the ATS, that's like, winning the lottery, but I think that, doing the hard stuff, picking up the phone, talking to people, not necessarily, hey, I want a job or I need a job. Maybe it's asking advice, having a coffee, but that's how then all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, my friend Victoria is looking for a job in SLED. Didn't you do that, or don't you do that? Yeah, okay. And I think in a world where everything is remote and everything is digital and everything else, this could be one of those things where if you can find that way, and again, it's those 6 degrees of separation we all have, pick up the phone and doing that. And I think that you'll find those secret gems and the things that are not published and all those little connections that come up. And for me, it's always served, really well in that way. And it also made me feel good about myself, because I always felt like I was doing something. And rather than just sitting and waiting or feeling bad, it's about, I think your forward motion is the key, right?
Awesome. Thank you. Krishna?
Yeah, I want to double down on that thought by saying there's no such thing as cheating in this process, right? Like, you should be using every possible resource available to you to get your foot in the door. Outside of my first job, every job that I've gotten since then has been side door, back door, through network, through talking to someone, through, just rogue meeting people somewhere, and they're like, oh, that's like a great conversation. You should talk to this person and go do that thing. So, I mean, especially during the interview process, given the way that ATS is working now, given how challenging it is to get through that first screen, I would say that your best bet is to try to figure out, like, how do I network with at least somebody, get your foot in the door that way. And then you can at least have a conversation with a person, hopefully, and make your case better. And even when it comes to things like case interviews, right? Yes, you don't want to misrepresent your skills, but part of what you're bringing to the table as a team member is your network. So if there are people that can help you elevate your game for the interview process, use them, because they're going to be able to help you elevate your game for the job too. So that like I said, there's no such thing as cheating.
Definitely agree. But it's unfortunately or fortunately does come down to a lot of who you know. So use your network. Victoria?
Yeah, absolutely. And also just remember, you can make more connections, right? It's who you know today, but also who you'll know tomorrow and the day after, the day after. I love that. I have two that I'd love to share. The first one I really alluded to earlier, but I think there's an importance of storytelling in the interview. Maybe it's 60 minutes, maybe it's only 30 minutes, but in a very short amount of time, you're there to make a connection. And the best way that human beings learn is through stories. But the key thing I want to mention is don't just say the stories. You don't just tell them, you got to show it. So for example, saying, I'm confident is very different than saying, I'm a confident person. Saying I'm strategic is very different than giving an example of where you were able to use foresight, data, strategy to develop a plan that was later able to solve a challenge because your plan was being followed, right? So you really need to tell the story, but also showcase the things that are in the job description, the characteristics that you're looking for. If you don't know what the job description is looking for, use ChatGPT to try to help you out. Literally type in that prompt and saying, hey, this job description, what are some of the characteristics? Assess whether you have them, attach examples to those, and make sure you have great stories around it. But I think the most important thing you can share is bring the positivity. Even if you're not feeling it that day, throw your hands up in the air, get a big smile on your face before you get on that Zoom or you get on that phone call, but bring your A game, right? Bring your energy. Don't let the outside world or your past experience dictate the next half an hour of your life, because that next half an hour could be the very job that gets you out of debt, gets you out of not feeling great about yourself, gets you to your career goals or financial goals, whatever it is. So really bring that positive attitude, bring your whole self.
Awesome. Last but not least, Deborah.
We're super tight on time. So I will just say one thing that I try to remind job seekers, it's a two-way street. Like, I know when you need a job, it doesn't always feel like it's a two-way street, but it is. You can ask those questions right back to the interviewers. They can say, give me a time when you've struggled to do X. And you can say, can you give me an example of a client that was really challenging for you and how you overcame that? Like, two-way street, you're interviewing them as well. And the second thing I'll just say is it's really easy for us to either look at job descriptions or look at websites or look at LinkedIn profiles and think a lot of things like, that's a perfect job for me, or that's exactly my dream. I see these words like perfect job, dream job. Like, I hope everyone goes out and accomplishes exactly their dream job, but we don't know what it's like it's like getting married after 2 dates. Like, we don't know how these things go. So if and when you get rejected in the process, like, the more that you can tell yourself, like, you don't really know what the reasons why. You don't know the reasons why. The feedback, like, there's a big thing on feedback, which we don't have time to get into, but like, feedback is just that. Like, it might be accurate, it may not be accurate. It's one person or one company's opinion. The feedback may not be valid, it may be valid. It doesn't matter. What matters is what you decide to take away from it. And if you can say, hey, I'll learn something, or you can say, I don't agree with them, or you can say, they gave me no feedback. Removing the emotional investment, this is corporate America. This is the way it works. I'm not saying it's fair or right, but the more that you can be resilient and to understand that it's you digesting the, like, this was the perfect job and they didn't even pick up my resume. This was they took me 6 rounds and didn't make me an offer. This stuff happens and it's terrible and I don't endorse it, but it does happen. And it doesn't mean you're not going to find what's right for you. And it doesn't mean that because one thing fell apart, the next thing will also.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for all the panelists taking time out of your very busy days to join and doing our very first virtual event. We're going to definitely work on having more. On that note, if you guys have suggestions, would like to see other topics in the future, do shoot us a message. we're literally built on the premise of helping job seekers, no matter where you are on the journey. Our number one goal is to help you at no cost ever. So whether you need help with your resumes, interview prepping, salary negotiation, leadership tips, any of those things, our amazing volunteers over at Pay Forward Coaching, we're here to help you. So definitely stay in touch, give us feedback, let us know how we can better serve you. And if you enjoyed this call today, please do tell your friends, family, co-workers, your uncles, the cashier, whoever you see about us. The more we get out there, the better. So thank you guys so much and hope to see you at the next one. Bye.